Welcome back. Big Dan Wilson alongside of Steve Queen, and Steve is the Safety and Risk Coordinator for Trupointe Cooperative. And today we're going to be talking about safety during harvest season. And first things first, Steve, I guess when we talk about our farmers and harvest season, it's always about climbing around the equipment, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And one of the number one causes of significant injury on the farm, Dan, is the fall. And the fall can take place for many different aspects. Our equipment is getting larger. The ladders climbing up into the cabs and so forth, they're longer. We want to make sure the farmer is aware to keep 3 points of contact on that. The other thing we want to have them remember is when we're tarping trucks or wagons, these also are larger. We're higher off the ground, so want to make sure that we've got good firm footing and so forth on there.
What are some of the other things that our farmers need to be aware of, Steve?
In their motorized vehicles, one of the some important things to consider is have fire extinguishers. Of course, we're back in the middle of fields and so forth, and if something goes wrong, that's a little time to where they could possibly save some equipment or possibly a life or something. The other thing is first aid kits. Of course, we're always getting cuts and dings and things when we're working on equipment that's broke down. Also is some sort of a communication device, be a cell phone. A lot of farmers have two-way radios and that sort of thing, so we can have constant communication in the event of an emergency.
You know, one of the things you talk about, that communication aspect that our farmers need to remember, is to make sure that they have those cell phones charged, that they have those devices that they need working properly. But it's almost kind of like the buddy system when you're going out scuba diving, or regardless of whatever work you're doing on the farm, it's always nice to have somebody there with you at all times too, isn't it?
Yes, that's correct. And one of the other things too is, as farmers are bringing in family members to help and so forth, is to communicate with those people too, because they're not used to the drive and the long hours and so forth. They're out there usually at harvest time helping and so forth, so that communication back to that person, give them a few tips on safety, what they need to keep aware of and so forth, and that'll make for a better outcome at the end of the evening.
You know, before we go any further, one of the things we want to talk about too is we want to talk about our family members, the older family members out on the farm. It's amazing that it's in your blood, no matter how old you are. But you know, some of our fathers and grandparents and some of the elderly people, just it's hard to get them to take a break too. They're always wanting to be out there. So we want to remind our farmer patrons to keep an eye on some of our older family members, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's correct, because as you pointed out, Dan, they're a little slower in movement and so forth, and as this machinery is larger, you know, it's got a lot of blind spots, so as we're backing up and hooking up wagons or trucks and so forth, we want to make sure we know where everyone is at all times.
You talk about hooking up equipment. One of the things that we always have to remind our farmer patrons about are those PTO shafts.
Yes, that's we're still working with a lot of power takeoff shafts. We want to be very careful with loose clothing around those, Dan. We also want to make sure that the sleeve that covers that PTO shaft is in place and in good condition, and it's freewheeling on there. So just a preventative maintenance type checklist on the PTO shafts.
Yeah, and whenever you're working with that kind of equipment, it's always good to do it with good lighting as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yeah, we want to make sure that we're not working in a dark atmosphere to where something could grab a piece of loose clothing. The other thing we want to keep in mind too is we want to make sure that we've got all of our guards and our shields in place. There's just so many times where we've removed those to do maintenance, and it's easier not to put those back on, and that's a real important part to put those back in place.
Yeah, crossing the T's and dotting the I's, that's all a part of the operation, isn't it? So what are some of the other things we need to keep in mind during this time of the year?
One of the things we want to make sure is when we kind of review our equipment before we head out is make sure we have our SMV, our slow-moving vehicle signs. So we want to make sure those are in good condition. By good condition, we want to make sure they're good and bright. There are some new retroflective ones that are out there that actually reflect the night light back. Some of the states are mandating that for slow-moving vehicles. The other thing we want to consider is when we have our equipment or our units alongside the road after dark, we leave the lights on. A lot of guys are putting on tail lights and so forth on their wagons and things, or want to make sure we have a flashing light of some sort back there, and there's all kinds of magnetic ones and different ways of attaching those.
You know, we're talking about lighting too for not only the combines that are out there and the wagons and the other vehicles, but mainly a lot of the people who are out there helping you. They're going to have their trucks in the road too. They're going to have their cars out there, their vehicles out there. So we also have to remind them to keep their lights on as well.
Yeah, that's right. And as we're working out there alongside of the road, there's a very inexpensive reflective vest that we can get. It's that bright lime green color that we see our construction workers and so forth wearing, and it's got the reflective tape on it. That, if we're going to be working alongside the roadway, that's another safety aspect to consider.
Yeah, and if they don't have that, if they don't have access to that, you know, wearing that reflective gear anytime you're outside at night or working, you know, out in the fields like that, it's very important that you're easily recognized once light does hit you.
That's correct.
What are some of the other things we need to keep in mind here, Steve?
When we get down to where we have machinery that breaks down and so forth, if we're going to be working on it out in the field, we want to make sure that we stop all moving parts. One of the things we want to consider is possibly lockout, tagout. We're used to that in the commercial setting, yes, but that's as easy as removing the key from the piece of equipment, putting it in our pocket. And the other thing we want to remind our customer farmers is also to wear eye protection. As we're working on things, we're going to have pieces of things that could possibly fly around and give an eye injury. One of the other things we want to consider too is as things dry out here after this little stretch, we're going to see a lot of more dust and so forth. So one thing to keep in mind is disposable respirators, and that'll help us keep a lot of that foreign material out of our lungs.
You know, a lot of things too that farmers fail to realize is the fact that, as you mentioned, there is a lot of dust, there is a lot of you know, clouds of debris that we're working in, and having that backup. We don't normally think about having some kind of a respirator backup, especially out on the farm. We have a tendency to consider ourselves, regardless of our age, kind of immune to that. So that's something new that we're reminding our safety patrons about when it comes to harvest time.
Yeah, that's correct. And, you know, over the years, we've always considered it's a natural, you know, type of a dust and so forth, but there's different things to consider in there. And any type of respiratory protection that we can offer is going to be a much better thing for us.
So what's next on your list here, Steve, that we need to remind our farmers about?
Well, this was kind of out to the general public. This is harvest time of the year, so we want to make the public be aware there's larger equipment out there on these county roads and so forth. So as this equipment has gotten larger, our roads are still the same size, so we're going to have to share the road with this equipment. Either we are going to have to move over or the general public is going to have to move over and possibly stop. So we're asking the public to be a little patient, you know, when we get into these situations, because these are some very important crops we're trying to get in out of the field this time of year.
Talk about sharing the road. One of the things that this time of the year kind of brings out into the roads, out of the fields, is something that we don't want to share the road with, and that's deer and other wildlife that's coming out of the fields this time of the year.
That's correct. That's one thing that we like to make the public be aware of as we're shelling corn and so forth. Those animals are moving from field to field, and I'll tell you, when they pop out of a cornfield, they're on the roadway in no time.
Yeah, no question about it. So one of the things when we're talking about as far as harvest season is sometimes what happens after harvest, and getting that grain from the field, you know, out of our wagons. The next step is getting them into the bins, and we have to be really careful when we're around our bins, especially when we're dealing with grain and all the hazardous things that could happen. Let's talk a little bit about that, Steve.
One of the things that we want to remember, Dan, is when we're emptying our bins out in the spring and so forth, and shortly after the first of the year, is after our grains are below the reclaim levels and so forth, and we've got to get in those bins and start cleaning them out. We want to be very well aware of some of the issues that we can run into, and grain engulfment is on the rise on the farm setting. So we want to make sure that, number one, we never enter a grain bin alone. We want to make sure that we let other members know, or of the work crew or the family. And then also we want to make sure that we have a harness and a lifeline, and that lifeline is attached to something that's substantial out there, and then that attendant is standing by that door. The engulfment rate, like I said, on the farm is a serious issue that we're faced with today, and that's one thing we need to get our arms around. So there's different types of kits out there that growers can get their hands on, and a little training with some other farm employees and so forth. And that's one of the things we really need to be sharp on and aware of is our grain bin entry procedures.
You know, there's something very exciting happening here at Trupointe, and when it comes to that kind of safety and awareness. And let's talk a little bit about the new facility that you're working on in Sydney, Ohio. That's more than just training our farmers and preparing them for those types of hazards on the farm.
Yeah, this is an exciting part to talk about for me because I'm very lucky to be involved with our Jeeps chapter, Grain Elevator and Processor Society here in Ohio. And we've teamed up, Trupointe and Jeeps has teamed up with SATRA, Safety and Technical Rescue Association. And we're training our firefighters in agricultural emergencies, be it high-angle rescue off of grain elevators or on-farm type rescues as well. And then with that, that firefighter will return the next year for a refresher course. So we've decided that it is our responsibility, we've taken it upon ourselves to train our rescuers when we have confined space type issues in this. One of the things that we have noticed is our volunteer fire departments, there's some regulations out there where they have to be qualified in both confined space and or high-angle rescue. And once we found out their qualifications, or if they do or don't have that, then where is the next responding fire department? So these are the things that we've learned over the years that have brought this training facility together. So we've got some great support from a lot of our industry people. Brock Grain Bins has donated a small grain bin that's set up down there right now. GSI is donated a grain engulfment simulator. Custom Agri Systems out of Napoleon and Upper Sandusky have donated a small mock-up of a grain leg. So all this type of equipment is down there to where these trainers can, instructors can train the fire departments on the proper methods of using that. And also, we're not relying completely on the commercial side of it for rescue. They're also trained to do this on farm as well.
You know, when you talk about safety, as we mentioned up and down the list, it's more than just our farmer patrons that have to remember what to do during this time of the year, but it's a 24/7, 365-day adventure for our farmers out there. And it's more than just our farmers when it comes to working out in the fields and transporting all the things that we have to do on the farm. We have to remind our general public, too, that they need to be aware and they need to take part in paying attention to what's happening out there and keeping our farmer patrons safe.
That's correct.
Our guest today, Steve Queen, Safety and Risk Coordinator from Trupointe Cooperative. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dan.